Since the independence of the United States as a sovereign state, 8 presidents have died in office. Of those 8, 4 were assassinated and 4 died of natural causes. In all 8 cases, the Vice President of the United States took over the office of presidency as part of the United States presidential line of succession. On March 26, 1841, William Henry Harrison became ill with a cold. According to the prevailing medical misconception of that time, it was believed that his illness was directly caused by the bad weather at his inauguration. However, Harrison's illness did not arise until more than 3 weeks after the event. The cold worsened, rapidly turning to pneumonia and pleurisy. Harrison's doctors tried cures, applying opium, castor oil, leeches, and Virginia snake root, but the treatments only made Harrison worse, and he became delirious. He died 9 days after becoming ill, at 12:30 a.m. on April 4, 1841, of right lower lobe pneumonia, jaundice, and overwhelming septicemia. He was the first United States president to die in office. Harrison served the shortest term of any American president, March 4 to April 4, 1841. 30 days, 12 hours, and 30 minutes. The cause of Zachary Taylor's death has not been fully established. On July 4, 1850, Taylor was known to have consumed copious amounts of ice water, cold milk, green apples, and cherries after attending holiday celebrations and the laying of the cornerstone of the Washington Monument. That same evening, he became severely ill with an unknown digestive ailment. Doctors used popular treatments of the time. Taylor died in the White House at 10:35 p.m. on July 9, 5 days after becoming ill. Contemporary reports listed the cause of death as bilious diarrhea, or a bilious cholera. Almost immediately after his death, rumors began to circulate that Taylor was poisoned by pro-slavery Southerners, and similar theories persisted into the 20th century. Their remains were exhumed and transported to the office of the Kentucky Chief Medical Examiner on June 17, 1991. Neutron activation analysis conducted at Oak Ridge National Laboratory revealed no evidence of poisoning, as arsenic levels were too low. The analysis concluded Taylor had contracted cholera morbus, or acute gastroenteritis. As Washington had open sewers, and his food or drink may have been contaminated. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln took place on Good Friday, on April 14, 1865, as the American Civil War was drawing to a close. The assassination occurred 5 days after the commanding general of the Army of Northern Virginia, Robert E. Lee, surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant and the Army of the Potomac. Lincoln was the first American president to be assassinated, though an unsuccessful attempt had been made on Andrew Jackson 30 years before in 1835. The assassination of Lincoln was planned and carried out by the well-known stage actor John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, vehement in his denunciation of Lincoln, and a strong opponent of the abolition of slavery in the United States. Lincoln was shot once in the back of his head while watching the play with his wife Mary Todd Lincoln at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., at around 10:15 p.m. on the night of April 14, 1865. An Army surgeon who happened to be at Ford's, Dr. Charles Leal, assessed Lincoln's wound as mortal. The president was then carried across the street from the theater to the Peterson boarding house, where he died the next morning at 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865 without regaining consciousness. The assassination of James A. Garfield took place in Washington, D.C., on July 2, 1881. Garfield was shot by Charles J. Guiteau, at 9:30 a.m., less than 4 months into Garfield's term as the 20th President of the United States. Garfield was scheduled to leave Washington on July 2, 1881 for his summer vacation. On that day, Guiteau lay in wait for the president at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station, on the southwest corner of present-day 6th Street and Constitution Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C. As President Garfield entered the waiting room of the station, Guiteau stepped forward and pulled the trigger from behind at point-blank range. Guiteau fired again and Garfield collapsed. One bullet grazed Garfield's shoulder, the other hit him in the back, passing the first lumbar vertebra but missing the spinal cord before coming to rest behind his pancreas. Garfield, conscious but in shock, was carried to an upstairs floor of the train station. One bullet remained lodged in his body, but doctors could not find it. Garfield was carried back to the White House. Although doctors told him that he would not survive the night, but the president remained conscious and alert. The next morning his vital signs were good, and doctors began to hope for recovery. His condition fluctuated, fevers came and went. Garfield struggled to keep down solid food, and spent most of the summer eating little, and that only liquids. However, after struggling 11 weeks, Garfield died on September 19, 1881. William McKinley was assassinated on September 6, 1901, inside the Temple of Music on the grounds of the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. McKinley was shaking hands with the public when he was shot by Leon Czolgosz, an anarchist. The president died 8 days later on September 14 from gangrene caused by the bullet wounds. McKinley had been elected for a second term in 1900. He enjoyed meeting the public, and was reluctant to accept the security available to his office. The secretary to the president, George B. Cortelyou, feared an assassination attempt would take place during a visit to the Temple of Music, and twice took it off the schedule. McKinley restored it each time. Czolgosz shot McKinley twice, as the president reached to shake his hand, in the reception line at the temple. One bullet grazed McKinley. The other entered his abdomen, and was never found. McKinley initially appeared to be recovering, but took a turn for the worse on September 13 as his wounds became gangrenous, and died early the next morning. Vice President Theodore Roosevelt succeeded him. After McKinley's murder, the United States Congress passed legislation to officially charge the Secret Service with the responsibility for protecting the president. Warren G. Harding died from a sudden heart attack in his hotel suite, while visiting San Francisco at around 7:35 p.m. on August 2, 1923. His death quickly led to theories that he had been poisoned, or committed suicide. Rumors of poisoning were fueled, in part, by a book called The Strange Death of President Harding, in which the author suggested that Mrs. Harding had poisoned her husband after learning of his infidelity. Mrs. Harding's refusal to allow an autopsy on President Harding only added to the speculation. According to the physicians attending Harding, however, the symptoms in the days prior to his death all pointed to congestive heart failure. On March 29, 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt went to the Little White House at Warm Springs, Georgia, to rest before his anticipated appearance at the founding conference of the United Nations. On the afternoon of April 12, Roosevelt said, "I have a terrific pain in the back of my head." He then slumped forward in his chair, unconscious, and was carried into his bedroom. The president's attending cardiologist, Dr. Howard Bruin, diagnosed a massive cerebral hemorrhage. At 3:35 p.m. that day, Roosevelt died without regaining consciousness. Roosevelt's death was met with shock and grief across the US and around the world. His declining health had not been known to the general public. Roosevelt had been president for more than 12 years, longer than any other person, and had led the country through some of its greatest crises, to the impending defeat of Nazi Germany, and within sight of the defeat of Japan, as well. Less than a month after his death, on May 8, the war in Europe ended. President Harry S. Truman, who turned 61 that day, dedicated Victory in Europe Day and its celebrations to late president's memory, and kept the flags across the U.S. at half-staff for the remainder of the 30-day mourning period. After Roosevelt's death, an editorial by the New York Times declared, "Men will thank God, on their knees 100 years from now, that Franklin D. Roosevelt was in the White House." John F. Kennedy was assassinated at 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time on Friday, November 22, 1963, in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. Kennedy was fatally shot while traveling with his wife, Jacqueline, Texas Governor John Connally, and the latter's wife Nellie, in a presidential motorcade. The 10-month investigation by the Warren Commission of 1963 to 1964 concluded that President Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald, and that Oswald had acted entirely alone. It also concluded that Jack Ruby acted alone when he killed Oswald, before he could stand trial. Nonetheless, polls conducted from 1966 to 2004 found that as many as 80% of Americans have suspected that there was a plot or cover-up. Most current John F. Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories put forth a criminal conspiracy involving parties as varied as the CIA, the Mafia, anti-Castro Cuban exile groups, the military-industrial complex, sitting Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban President Fidel Castro, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, the KGB, or some combination of those entities. In an article published prior to the 50th anniversary of Kennedy's assassination, author Vincent Bugliosi estimates that a total of 42 groups, 82 assassins, and 214 people have been accused in conspiracy theories challenging the lone gunman theory.